Today I'm going to share my top 3 secrets with you for making a perfect sandwich selection every time. Hi, I'm Taryn. Welcome to my kitchen studio. This is where I like to have fun with food and share tips and tricks to make your food not only taste delicious, but look fantastic too. If this is the type of thing you're into, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Today we're making a sandwich selection. Club sandwiches, tea sandwiches, finger sandwiches, cocktail sandwiches, whatever you might like to call them. Here in New Zealand, we call these club sandwiches. You might call them something else, toast them, or even cut them differently. But today I'm going to share my top 3 tips for getting the basics right. These are the ingredients I'm going to use today, but you can use whatever you like and enjoy. There aren't any rules, but I would recommend that you use a variety of these basic ingredients. I've got a white loaf and a brown loaf here. That makes a lovely colour contrast. We've got some mayonnaise and mustard. These are really the glue to stick our whole sandwich together. Then we've got our salad greens. Anything will work here. I like this mixture of red and green, curly and flat. It gives us a nice variety. Then we've got our cucumber and tomato, but again you can use anything here. Avocados, pickles, capsicum, just what you've got and enjoy. And moving on to our meats. I've got some chicken here, blitzed up with some mayonnaise and sun-dried tomato. It tastes great and it's easy to spread onto our sandwiches. I've got some ham and salami. You can also use things like boiled eggs, salmon and cold roast meats. I've got 2 different chutneys here. These are really the flavourings for our sandwiches. I've got a pear and tamarind and a tomato relish, but you can use things like pesto, hummus and dips. And lastly, I've got some smoked cheese, some sprouts and some snow pea shoots. We need to slice our tomato and cucumber. I'm going to use a mandolin to slice the cucumber. It's just nice and quick and you get every piece so uniform. But alternatively, you can just cut it with a little knife. Doesn't that make quick work? And for the tomato, just going to cut out the little core piece here by digging my knife in and just running it around like that. And we'll cut it in half and slice it as thin as you can. A lot of people are reluctant to put tomatoes in their sandwiches because they think it makes them go soggy. I've made hundreds of club sandwiches and have never had that problem. I just cut them thin and then I think it's all in the wrapping of the sandwich that stops it going soggy. I'll show you that at the end. Try and keep the pieces nice and thin. We're ready to start making our sandwiches. I'm going to show you how we used to do this when we'd make hundreds of these for conferences and events. The first thing we need to do is lay out our bread. I'm making 6 sandwiches here, each with 3 layers of bread. I've laid out the bread like this so that the colour alternates on the plate. You'll see what I mean soon. Tip number 1, gluing. You need to use something like a mayonnaise or a mustard to glue every layer of the sandwich together. On top of the bread, on top of the lettuce, on top of the meat, you get the general idea. This helps to stick the whole sandwich nicely together. I've put my mayonnaise and mustard into piping bags. This makes this job so much quicker and easier. We'll start with a layer of our mayonnaise glue along this bottom layer of bread, like this. Then a layer of lettuce greens. Use an assortment, breaking the pieces smaller if necessary, and cover the piece of bread to the corners. Time for some glue, this time using the mustard. And now some meat. I'm alternating the meats so that we have some brown bread and some white bread with each of the fillings. With the chicken in a piping bag, it's easier to put onto the sandwich, but you could also gently spread it on. then some more mayonnaise glue, and we can put on the next layer of bread. Now we add the chutney, alternating the two flavours to add variety. Next we add some cucumber. And yep, you guessed it, more glue. Then the tomatoes. More glue. And alternating with sprouts, cheese and snow pea shoots. And a final layer of glue. Lastly comes the top layer of bread. Make sure you keep the layers nice and square. Tip number 2, wrapping. You need to wrap your sandwich really well. Once the sandwich is made, stack it up nice and evenly. We want to stack them up like this in nice even rows. We don't want to overlap them like that because the sandwiches underneath will get dented when we put pressure on them with the wrap. And wrap it really well with plastic wrap. This keeps the sandwich nice and fresh and helps to compact it, making cutting a breeze. This might seem like an excessive amount of Glad wrap, but it is so important for a few different reasons. It keeps the sandwiches nice and fresh, wrapping them up tightly. It also compacts the sandwich, which makes it so much easier when you come to cutting them. And lastly, in my opinion, this is what stops the tomatoes going soggy. I'm going to put these into the fridge and we'll cut them tomorrow just before we need them. Tip number 3. My top tip for sandwich making is to make them the day before you need them. This might sound different to what you may have thought, but honestly, once you've done it once, there'll be no looking back. When the sandwiches have had time in the fridge to firm up, they're so much easier to cut without getting finger dents, and you'll end up with a beautifully cut, soft sandwich. These have had time to firm up, and now they're ready to cut. The first thing we need to do is cut off the crusts. This is really easy to do when they're all neatly stacked, like this. I'm using a long serrated knife. These are invaluable when cutting breads and some types of large fruit. There are a few different ways we can go about cutting these further. We can cut them into triangles, known as club sandwiches in New Zealand, or we can cut them into finger sandwiches, like that, look a bit like your finger, just a long piece. Or we can cut it in half again, and then we end up with little squares, little cocktail sandwiches. I'll show you all three, and we'll start with the triangles. We need to bear in mind when we're cutting the triangles that this piece of bread isn't perfectly square. So our pieces of triangle sandwich are not all going to be equal. These two will match up, and these two will match up. I'll show you how. Use a gentle sawing motion with your knife hand, and support the bread with the other hand. Be careful not to squash them, because no one likes squashed sandwiches. I'll show you what I was meaning before about the triangles. This one here is short and wide, and this one is narrower and taller. So if we put these two together, don't know if you can quite see this from there, this one is standing up taller. This might not seem so obvious when you've only got a few sandwiches on a plate, but when you're doing big platters of them and you've got sandwiches lined up, if you've got them like this, it's going to look all higgledy-piggledy and messy. So keep them in their pairs and it will look so much better. With these ones, we'll first cut them into finger sandwiches so that you can see what they look like. And then I'll go on to cut them into cocktail size. And there's a little finger sandwich. To get cocktail sandwiches, we'll just slice these in half. I've got these very cute little cocktail sticks that look fabulous on these little sandwiches. Or in them, I suppose. Now we're ready to plate our sandwiches. You could use something like this, a white platter, but today I think I'm going to use this big chopping board. Starting with a row of cocktail sandwiches down the middle gives a nice line to branch out from. Then adding the club sandwiches in their little pairs and changing the angles adds some visual appeal. I'm going to alternate the sandwiches based on the bread colour. I'll put these last little cocktail sandwiches along the outer sides, starting with a white sandwich to contrast with the brown one in the centre. And lastly, I'll add a couple of little lettuce garnishes here to finish off the platter. Wow, let the cocktail party begin! Doesn't that look amazing? I hope you've learnt something and can take your sandwich making up to the next level, thinking about gluing, wrapping and making them ahead of time. That's all I've got for you today. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to click the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Happy sandwich making!